Picture this. You're in a heated argument with someone you care about. Your blood is boiling, your heart is racing, and every fiber of your being wants to unleash a verbal assault that will make them regret ever crossing you. Your finger is hovering over the send button on that scathing text message, or your mouth is open, ready to deliver words that you know will cut deep. But then, for just a moment, you pause, you take a breath, and in that split second of hesitation, you realize that whatever you're about to do will change everything, and not in the way you want. That pause, that moment of conscious choice between your impulse and your action, is one of the most powerful tools you possess as a human being. It's the difference between wisdom and foolishness, between building relationships and destroying them, between becoming the person you want to be and remaining trapped by your worst instincts. Today, we're going to explore something that could fundamentally transform how you navigate every challenge, conflict, and decision in your life. We're diving deep into the art of thinking before acting, and I'm going to share with you ancient wisdom that's more relevant today than it was 2,000 years ago. By the end of this conversation, you'll have a practical framework that can save you from countless regrets and guide you toward responses that align with your deepest values and highest aspirations. Let me start by asking you something personal. How many times in the past month have you done or said something impulsively that you later wished you could take back? How often have you reacted to a situation so quickly that you didn't give yourself the chance to consider whether your response was actually helpful, kind, or wise? If you're like most people, the answer is probably more times than you'd like to admit. We live in a world that seems designed to trigger our impulses. Social media notifications ping constantly, demanding immediate reactions. News cycles push us toward outrage and instant judgment. Our workplaces expect rapid responses to emails and messages. Even our entertainment is designed for quick dopamine hits rather than sustained reflection. In this environment, the person who can pause, think, and then respond thoughtfully has an enormous advantage over everyone else who's simply reacting to whatever stimulus comes their way. But here's what's fascinating and also deeply concerning. Our brains haven't evolved to handle this constant barrage of decisions and stimuli. For most of human history, we needed quick reflexes to survive physical threats. If a predator was charging at you, stopping to philosophize about the nature of danger wasn't exactly adaptive. But today, most of our challenges aren't physical threats that require split-second responses. They're complex social, emotional, and intellectual situations that benefit enormously from careful thought and consideration. Yet we're still operating with ancient wiring that pushes us toward immediate action. When someone criticizes us, our fight or flight response kicks in as if we're being attacked by a wild animal. When we see something we want to buy, our brain starts rationalizing the purchase before we've even considered whether we need it or can afford it. When we're stuck in traffic, we experience stress responses that would be appropriate if we were literally trapped and in mortal danger. The cost of living this way is enormous. Relationships are damaged by words spoken in anger that can never be taken back. Careers are derailed by emails sent in frustration or decisions made without proper consideration. Financial security is undermined by purchases driven by momentary desire rather than long-term planning. Health suffers because we choose immediate gratification over sustainable habits. Dreams are abandoned because we react to setbacks with despair rather than responding with resilience and creativity. Think about some of the biggest regrets in your life. I'm willing to bet that most of them involve times when you acted impulsively rather than taking time to think through your options. Maybe you quit a job in anger without having another one lined up. Perhaps you said something cruel to a family member during an argument that damaged your relationship for years. Or maybe you made a major purchase or investment without doing proper research and it cost you financially. Now think about the times in your life when you're most proud of how you handled a difficult situation. I suspect those moments involved some degree of pause, reflection, and intentional choice about how to respond. You probably considered multiple options, thought about the long-term consequences of your actions, and chose a response that aligned with your values rather than just your immediate emotional state. This isn't a coincidence. The quality of our lives is largely determined by the quality of our responses to the situations we encounter. And the quality of our responses depends on whether we're reacting impulsively or responding thoughtfully. The ancient Stoic philosophers understood this principle better than perhaps any other school of thought in human history. Stoicism, which emerged in ancient Greece and was later developed in Rome, isn't about suppressing emotions or accepting bad situations passively. It's a practical philosophy focused on developing wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline in order to live a flourishing life regardless of external circumstances. The Stoics recognized that while we can't control what happens to us, we have complete control over how we respond to what happens to us. This insight seems simple, but it's actually revolutionary. Most people spend their lives trying to control things that are ultimately outside their influence while neglecting the one thing they do have power over: their own thoughts, judgments, and responses. Marcus Aurelius, who was both a Roman emperor and a Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about this principle in his personal journal, which we now know as Meditations. He constantly reminded himself that external events are neutral, and that his judgment about those events is what gives them their power to affect his peace of mind. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Imagine having the mindset of someone who ruled one of the most powerful empires in human history, yet understood that his greatest power wasn't over armies or territories, but over his own responses to daily challenges. Marcus Aurelius dealt with plagues, wars, political intrigue, and personal tragedies, yet he maintained his commitment to responding with wisdom rather than reacting with impulse. Epictetus, another great Stoic teacher who had been enslaved for much of his life before becoming a philosopher, taught that freedom isn't about external circumstances, but about internal mastery. He said, "No one can hurt you without your permission." This doesn't mean that people can't do things that affect you physically or materially, but rather that your inner peace and sense of self-worth don't have to be dependent on how others treat you or what situations you find yourself in. Seneca, perhaps the most practical of the Stoic philosophers, was a successful businessman and advisor to emperors who understood the challenges of applying philosophical principles in real-world situations. He wrote extensively about the importance of taking time for reflection and self-examination. He advocated for regular periods of stepping back from the busyness of daily life to consider whether our actions align with our values and long-term goals. What made the Stoics so effective wasn't that they eliminated emotional responses or avoided difficult situations. Instead, they developed a systematic approach to examining their initial reactions and choosing their responses based on reason and virtue rather than impulse and emotion. The Stoic framework for wise response can be broken down into 4 essential steps that you can apply to virtually any situation you encounter. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or avoiding action. It's about ensuring that your actions are chosen rather than merely triggered. The first step is simply to pause and breathe. This sounds almost ridiculously simple, but it's the foundation of everything else. When something happens that triggers a strong emotional response, your first instinct should be to create a small space between the stimulus and your response. Take a deep breath, count to 5, or simply remind yourself that you have a choice about how to proceed. This pause doesn't need to be long, just long enough to shift from automatic reaction to conscious choice. The second step is to examine your initial reaction with curiosity rather than judgment. What emotions are you feeling? What thoughts are running through your mind? What does your body want to do? Instead of immediately acting on these impulses, treat them as information about your current state rather than commands that must be obeyed. You might notice that you're feeling angry, scared, excited, or frustrated, and that's perfectly normal and human. The key is recognizing these feelings without being controlled by them. The third step is to apply reason and virtue to the situation. Ask yourself what response would be most aligned with your deepest values and long-term goals. What would courage look like in this situation? What would wisdom suggest? How could you respond in a way that builds rather than destroys? What would you advise a good friend to do if they were facing the same situation? This step often reveals that your initial impulse, while understandable, might not be the most helpful or appropriate response. The fourth step is to choose your response based on this reflection rather than your initial impulse. This choice might be to speak up or to remain silent, to act or to wait, to engage or to withdraw. What matters isn't the specific action you take, but that it's a conscious choice based on wisdom rather than an automatic reaction based on impulse. Let's look at how this framework applies to some common situations you might face in your daily life. Imagine you're at work and a colleague takes credit for an idea that was actually yours during an important meeting. Your initial reaction might be anger and a desire to immediately call them out in front of everyone. But if you apply the Stoic framework, you might pause and recognize that while your anger is understandable, publicly embarrassing your colleague probably won't achieve your real goals of being recognized for your contributions and maintaining good working relationships. Instead, you might choose to speak with them privately after the meeting, or document your contributions more carefully in the future, or discuss the situation with your supervisor in a constructive way. Or consider a situation where someone you care about says something that hurts your feelings. Your impulse might be to hurt them back with a cutting remark, or to withdraw and give them the silent treatment. But reflection might reveal that they're probably dealing with their own stress or challenges, and that responding with understanding rather than retaliation could actually strengthen your relationship. You might choose to express how their words affected you without attacking their character, or to ask if something else is bothering them that you could help with. Think about those moments when you're scrolling through social media and you see a post that makes you angry or frustrated. Your immediate impulse might be to fire off a heated comment or share the post with your own outraged commentary. But pause and reflection might help you realize that engaging in online arguments rarely changes anyone's mind and often leaves you feeling worse rather than better. You might choose to scroll past, to research the topic more thoroughly before forming an opinion, or to have a thoughtful conversation with someone in person rather than adding to the digital noise. Financial decisions are another area where the pause between impulse and action can save you from significant regret. When you see something you want to buy, especially if it's expensive or if you're feeling emotional, the Stoic approach would be to step back and ask whether this purchase aligns with your values and long-term financial goals. Will you still want this item in a month? Do you have the money to spend without creating financial stress? Are you trying to buy this thing to solve an emotional problem that it can't actually solve? Even in relationships, the space between stimulus and response can be transformative. When your partner does something that annoys or disappoints you, your first reaction might be to criticize or complain. But if you pause and consider what you're really trying to achieve, you might realize that expressing appreciation for what they do well and making a specific kind request for what you'd like to see different would be much more effective than criticism. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require you to be perfect or to eliminate emotional responses. It just requires you to insert a moment of choice between feeling and acting. Over time, this practice becomes more natural and automatic, but even experienced practitioners still need to consciously apply it, especially in high-stress or emotionally charged situations. Building this habit of reflection requires consistent practice, just like developing physical fitness or learning a musical instrument. The Stoics were big believers in daily practices that strengthen your ability to respond wisely rather than react impulsively. One of the most powerful practices is morning reflection, where you spend a few minutes at the start of each day considering what challenges you might face and how you want to respond to them. This isn't about trying to predict exactly what will happen, but about mentally rehearsing your commitment to pause and choose your responses rather than simply reacting. You might remind yourself of your core values and consider how you want to embody them in your interactions with others. Evening reflection is equally important. Before going to sleep, spend some time honestly examining how you handled the challenges of the day. When did you respond wisely, and when did you react impulsively? What can you learn from both your successes and your mistakes? This isn't about beating yourself up for not being perfect, but about gradually developing greater self-awareness and wisdom. Keeping a simple journal can be incredibly helpful for this process. You don't need to write lengthy entries, just brief notes about situations where you paused and chose your response, or times when you reacted impulsively and what you might do differently next time. Over time, you'll start to notice patterns in what triggers your strongest reactions and develop strategies for handling those situations more skillfully. Another powerful practice is creating physical and mental space between yourself and potential triggers. This might mean putting your phone in another room when you're trying to focus, waiting 24 hours before responding to emails that make you angry, or literally walking away from a heated conversation to give yourself time to cool down and think clearly. It's also helpful to practice this framework in low-stakes situations so that it becomes more natural when you really need it. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic, instead of immediately getting angry, try pausing and choosing your response. The next time you receive a mildly annoying text message, take a breath before responding. These small moments of practice build your capacity for wisdom in bigger, more important situations. Of course, there are some common obstacles you'll face as you try to develop this habit of thinking before acting. One of the biggest is the feeling that you don't have time to pause and reflect. In our fast-paced world, it often seems like you need to respond immediately to emails, messages, and requests. But the truth is that most situations that feel urgent actually aren't, and taking even a few seconds to pause rarely makes any practical difference in timing while making an enormous difference in the quality of your response. Another challenge is dealing with intense emotions that seem to demand immediate action. When you're really angry, scared, or excited, it can feel almost impossible to pause and reflect. This is where regular practice in calmer moments pays off. The more you strengthen your ability to create space between stimulus and response in everyday situations, the more likely you are to be able to access that skill when emotions are running high. Sometimes you might worry that pausing to think will make you seem indecisive or weak. But actually, the opposite is true. People who respond thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively are generally seen as more mature, reliable, and trustworthy. They're the ones others turn to for advice and leadership because they've demonstrated the wisdom to consider multiple perspectives before acting. There are, of course, genuine emergency situations where immediate action is required. If someone is in physical danger, you don't want to pause for lengthy philosophical reflection. But these situations are much rarer than we often think. Most of the time, taking a moment to think improves rather than hinders your ability to help. It's also worth acknowledging that developing this skill is a lifelong process. Even people who have been practicing Stoic principles for decades still sometimes react impulsively. The goal isn't perfection, but gradual improvement and greater consistency in choosing wise responses over automatic reactions. The transformation that comes from mastering the art of thinking before acting extends far beyond avoiding regrettable decisions, though that alone would be valuable. When you consistently pause and choose your responses, you develop a reputation as someone who can be trusted in difficult situations. You become the person others come to for advice because they know you'll think things through rather than just offering quick emotional reactions. Your relationships improve because you're responding to others based on wisdom and care rather than reacting based on your momentary emotional state. You make better financial decisions because you're choosing based on your long-term goals rather than immediate impulses. Your work performance improves because you're able to handle challenges and setbacks with greater resilience and creativity. Perhaps most importantly, you develop a deeper sense of personal integrity and self-respect. When you know that your actions are aligned with your values rather than driven by unexamined impulses, you feel more confident and authentic. You're less likely to feel regret or shame about your behavior because you're acting from a place of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. This doesn't mean you become emotionally distant or overly analytical about everything. Emotions are an important source of information about what matters to you and what you value. The Stoic approach isn't about suppressing emotions, but about ensuring that your actions are guided by wisdom rather than controlled by emotional impulses. As we come to the end of our exploration today, I want to leave you with a challenge that could change your life if you take it seriously. For the next week, commit to practicing the 4-step framework we've discussed in at least one situation each day. It could be something as simple as pausing before responding to a text message that irritates you, or as significant as thinking carefully before making a major decision. Pay attention to the difference between moments when you react impulsively and moments when you pause and choose your response. Notice how you feel afterward in each case. I'm confident you'll find that the moments of conscious choice lead to better outcomes and greater satisfaction than the moments of automatic reaction. Remember that this is a skill that develops over time with consistent practice. Be patient with yourself as you learn and celebrate the small victories along the way. Every moment where you create space between stimulus and response is a moment where you're exercising your uniquely human capacity for wisdom and choice. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern life often makes us forget. You are not at the mercy of your circumstances or your initial emotional reactions. You have the power to pause, to think, and to choose responses that reflect your highest values and deepest wisdom. In a world that seems designed to trigger impulsive reactions, the person who masters the art of thinking before acting has discovered one of the most valuable skills for creating a meaningful and satisfying life. Your future self is counting on the choices you make in those crucial moments between stimulus and response. Choose wisely.